Kia ora everyone, and welcome along to the webinar that Heather and I are putting together, and thank you for Jenny. Jenny has got the cognition education label on the bottom of her screen, helping us out with all the techie stuff and all the background, getting everything together. So wonderful that you're all here together, and we're going to get started. Heather and I are going to start with the karakia, and then we'll introduce ourselves and get started on the webinar session for today. I'm just going to share my screen. Cool, so let's get started with a little whakatauki. Whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, ki mā taratara ki tai. I he ake ana te akakura, he tino, he huka, he hauhonga, te he Māori ora. Great, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'd just like to introduce myself. If you haven't met me before, my name's Julia Crawford and I work with cognition education as a PLD facilitator. My heritage is from the Netherlands. I was born here in New Zealand and I live on the most beautiful Waiheke Island. My passions are my family, my son Leo, who's in year 13, and my husband Grant, my garden and getting out on the water on the maunga here in the Hauraki Gulf. I have an absolute passion for mathematics and statistics, but actually more than that, my passion is about teaching. My background is as a secondary maths teacher, also worked in pre-service education and also as a head of department. I have a passion for travel. At the moment, that involves a lot of travel around New Zealand. And down the bottom there, I've got the flag from the Solomon Islands because I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing in the Solomons. Heather, if I click over to the next slide, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, tēnā koe katoa. Ko Heather Lewis tōku ingoa. As you can see, I'm from Tamaki Makaurau and live very close to the Harbour Bridge, actually, on the North Shore. Yes, same with Julia, I'm very close with my family. There's a photograph of my extended family in the middle there on a trip we made, unfortunately, to bury my father-in-law this year on Rarotonga. My husband was raised on 3 of the islands on the Cook Islands, so there's some connections with Rarotonga and Achu. So I'm with cognition education. I have 2 roles. One is mathematics PLD and the other is I'm national leader for programs for students accelerating learning in mathematics. The program's ALM and MST. I think that's me. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Heather. So in the session today, I'm going to run the session today, and I'm ably supported by Heather, especially as Heather comes from the primary sector background. And although the presentation today is about secondary work, we know that this is an issue in our primary sector work as well. So I thought it would be great to have Heather along today to kind of, you know, to contribute to the conversations in case we want to head down thinking about the primary sector as well. So our agenda for today, we're going to have a conversation about de-streaming, what the trends and the research indicate. The second part of today's session, I want to talk about acceleration, and I want to look at 2 ways of thinking of the word acceleration. And then finally, I want to have a think about what it is to undertake a journey of de-streaming if you're in a school and looking at doing this. I want to have a think about teacher beliefs, and I've got a little kind of analogy of a 3-carriage train, which I think is really helpful. So let's get started. Now, I wanted to start with a slide about having a curious mind, because in my career as a maths teacher, I've worked in a lot of schools where we've streamed, and I noticed that when I notice that teachers and myself, I get quite defensive sometimes when people start proposing different ways of doing things. So I really want to emphasize that I'm coming to this on a journey. I've kind of, you know, dabbled reading and research, not necessarily believed it all, then kind of come back to it, listen to some more things, and then, you know, wondered if I can actually accept that some things might not be as I initially thought. So I want to change my yes, but mentality, which is very tempting. Go, oh, yes, I hear what you're saying, but I want to change that to more of a yes and strategy. So I want to be able to open to thinking of things differently from different perspectives. So that for me is all about having a different mindset. Now, before we get started on the work today, I want to talk about these words, attainment and ability, because quite often I hear teachers talking about mixed ability classes or my low ability class or my top ability class. And in the last few years, I've been trying to shift my language to talk about attainment instead of ability, because this really struck me when I looked at my son. So my son is in year 13, but when he was in year 9 and before, he was in a low ability class. And it struck me that there is nothing low ability about my son, other than he wasn't really performing all that well on school tests and things. So so the word ability didn't fit in my thinking about my son, and I really worried about teachers thinking that he was somehow low ability. Now, he might be a different kind of learner, he's likely to be dyslexic like I am. So I wanted to shift my language to talk about attainment, because for me, that has a sense of growth, that at the moment he might be, or I might be, attaining at a lower level than other students, but it opens up the possibility of growth and that he can achieve at a higher attainment level in the future. Another little language term I want to talk about, we're talking about streaming today. That's a kind of phrase that we use in New Zealand. Banding would be another one that we talk about in secondary schools quite a lot. Ability grouping might be something we talk about in primary, but also in secondary. In the UK and in America and the US, they use phrases like setting and tracking. And we also hear in the research, especially, the words homogeneous class groupings. So I'm talking about all of these. I'm not going to just make distinctions about whether students move from one class to another on a termly basis, or it's mainly this idea of having different streams of classes. In New Zealand, we typically have 3 levels of classes, would be the most common arrangement: a low, a high, and some sort of middle group. Or sometimes is a mixed group and a low is separated. So any of these kind of, iterations, I'm going to group together under the streaming banner. Now, in my reading and thinking about this topic, was really spiked by this piece of work here, ākonga te raki, the Māori Futures Collective, which is about a collection of voices of our learners, really, our students, our Māori students, and a very clear message to us, a challenge, if you like, that we start to think about our learners and listen to what they're saying, what the effects are of the work that we've been doing. It's a real call to action piece of work. Interestingly, although it's phrased in a general kind of New Zealand, education space, there's a very big message for mathematics teachers. The 4 case studies are all about de-streaming in secondary maths classrooms. It's almost as if somehow the maths faculties in our secondary schools have been the last ones hanging on to streaming. And I find that really interesting. And I wonder why that is. And here we've got some really clear messages. So I'm going to capture some of this in our talk today, as well as explore some of the other literature that's available. So when we hear from our young people, here are a couple of the quotes in this report. Really, our young people telling us that when they were placed into a low class, them and their families have a sense of grief about that. That means that they start to think of themselves as being low in terms of mathematics. They understand themselves that they have been streamed into a place where they aren't going to be given the same opportunities in other places. So I really kind of feel that grief after hearing it and going onto the website for the Māori Futures Collective and hearing some of those young people who are now grown to adults and reflecting on what that was like. That grieves me that I might have been a part of that in my teaching and organisation of my departments in school teaching experience. I'm not trying to beat myself up. I'm not trying to say that, like, oh, poor me, I must have done terrible things, because I know that whatever we do in terms of organising our maths classrooms is always coming from the right place. I've got lots of justifications for why I organised my classes into an ABC stream, for example. but hearing it from young people themselves and the impact that had, that was a real wake-up call for me. I like this picture. It kind of represents what is going on here, this idea of a tree of opportunity, and that streaming creates this balancing space where some students are lifted higher and closer to the opportunities that can be plucked from the tree. This for me rings true because I think about the kinds of different activities I would do with my top class relative to my low stream class. So, you know, that's another way of thinking of it. Am I really giving the opportunities for people to grow and progress in their mathematics thinking if I'm only giving open-ended topics and open-ended tasks and creative learning opportunities to my top stream class? So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper now into a literature review, and this literature review was created for the Australian education sector, but I think there's a lot of relevance to our New Zealand space as well. There's 3 ways that they analyse the effects of streaming. So student academic outcomes, psychological outcomes, and student social outcomes. Now I'm going to get you to do some thinking in a second. So we're going to break you into some breakout rooms, and I want you to think ahead. What do you think? What do you think the research is going to tell us when I give you a little bit of a summary of that research? So I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms. I'm going to get you to go to a Jamboard and have an opportunity to pop some ideas on there and discuss with the people in your breakout room of what you think the research is going to tell us in these 3 networks. Now, at the end of that, I'm going to get you to review all of that and just come back with one word. Now, it might be a noun, it might be a kind of, a symbol, if you like, rather than just I don't know, it could be anything, be creative. But I'd like just one word that you could perhaps explain to us why you think that one word summarizes what you think the research is going to tell us. How many groups do you think we'll have, Jenny?
Maybe 4.
Cool. Okay. All right.
Thanks. And the link for the link for the Jamboard, Julia, is in the chat. So that link will take you to your Jamboard.
Awesome. Okay, that sounds great. So we're not going to give you long. Okay, we're just going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes. So get straight in and share some ideas, pop down as many things as you can into the Jamboard. Now, I could probably show you what the Jamboard looks like. There you go. This is what the Jamboard will look like when you're there. So what do you think the research is going to tell us? And you can pop in some sticky notes using the little slide on the side. Now, if you're in breakout room 1, go to Jamboard 1. If you're in breakout room 2, go to Jamboard page 2, etc., etc. Follow the pattern. Get it? Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you back. Welcome back, everyone. That's awesome. So I was wondering if we could hear from, say, group 1, and whether you came up with one word, one word to summarize your thing, and a quick explanation of that word.
Do you want me to go for it, girls?
Go for it.
Okay. So we couldn't come up with one word, but we definitely had some words that went across all of your 3 sort of headings, and probably the 2 that came up, or maybe 3 that came up most commonly, were damaging, isolating, and limiting.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you. Awesome. And what about group 2? Have we got some thoughts from group 2? Any words?
Not really. We sort of started discussing and then we ran out of time. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. Let's hear from group 3. We've got some sticky notes there on group 3. What do you think? What's your word? Have you got a word?
We have many words.
Many words. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
What sort of theme would you say?
Pretty much negative. Yeah.
Negative. Okay.
Yeah. Mostly negative.
Mostly negative. Okay, cool. And group 4. Somebody from group 4, I jump in.
I was with the group in group 4, and I think one of the things that one of the people in the groups was talking about is the diminished student belief in the ability to do maths and dropping it. So, you know, being put in a lower group means that I actually don't believe I can do this subject, and therefore it's not for me. I will move on and not bother with it anymore in my life.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into my slide show now and see if we can have a look to see what the literature review told us. So I'll just share screen. Oh, actually, I'm just going to stop that and go back because I forgot to click the little share sound. And now I don't think the right screen is showing. Let's try again. This is good. We'll get there. Excellent. Fantastic. I'm hoping you can see the little breakout room picture. Is that right? Yep. Cool. Awesome. So, so this literature review, they actually read a lot of literature and then decided on these 3 headings and a 4th one to do with teachers as well. So I'm going to just quickly walk us through what their findings were and see if that matches with what you talked about in your rooms as well. So starting off with academic outcomes, there's been a lot of research in this and over a very long time. And the main thing is that there's a lot of contradiction. So some research finds a very clear link between streaming and educational outcomes, and other research says little or no effect. And the authors of this literature review say it's to do with the methodology. So how were we looking for these changes? I've tried to highlight some of the big key messages, but really when I read through the literature review, it's so complex. There's so many things that impact it. So for example, if we compare streamed classes with non-streamed classes, we see hardly any impact at all on academic outcomes. However, if you compare your low streamed class with a high streamed class, we see an impact on educational outcomes. So that performance, that increase in the gap, the increase gets bigger when we're comparing those students that are in the low streamed with the high streamed. We could also see from some of the research that there's an increasing gap, particularly for mathematics. So in that very last sentence at the bottom, it talks how the socioeconomic background, if we compare low and high socioeconomic background, the gap increases with age, the achievement gap increases with age, particularly for mathematics. So doubling between the ages of 7 to 11 and 12 to 15. So you can see already that the message isn't going to be extremely clear from the literature reviews, because in some ways we're starting to see different things impact. It depends on what you're comparing, and also there's these other factors coming in, like socioeconomic background. Now that message continues to get complex when we look at some of the other ways of considering impact. So let's think about student psychological outcomes. Now, when I'm talking about psychological outcomes, I'm thinking about, or this research rather was thinking about, things like the mental state of the student, their self-concept, their motivation, their mental health, those sorts of things. And again, the research is really divided with this big phrase of it depends. It depends on what factors you compare to. So for example, when we think about comparing students who've been streamed into low classes or high streams, we can think about this big fish, little pond effect. So the social comparison theory, where students will tend to compare themselves to those around them. So we might say, oh, okay, if I'm in a low streamed class, this top student in the low streamed class feels quite more positive because they're comparing themselves to the others in the class. So there's a kind of positive effect on self-concept in that case. On the other hand, in a top streamed class, there are some students who feel very negatively impacted in terms of their self-concept when they're in a top class. So you might think of that student, those students that feel themselves not being deserving in that class, feel very impacted by being surrounded by highly effective mathematicians, say. So you can see it's a really complex interplay. There's more to it as well. We found that students in higher streams tend to have a higher self-concept, academic self-concept, and they tend to have a greater motivation to succeed than students in the lower streams. But students in the lower streams sometimes feel less motivated and have an even more negative self-impact. So you can see it's kind of strong for some students and negative for other students. It's not an easy thing to make a call that it's positive or negative. Students in a low ability stream tend to have less access to other positive role models. And there's also this effect where high achieving students have fewer leadership opportunities for mentoring if they're in a high stream class. So I go back to what I wrote right at the beginning there. It depends. It kind of depends on whether you're in the low or high stream, and it depends on you as an individual whether it was a positive thing or not in terms of these psychological outcomes. The third element that comes through in the research is considering the effects of streaming on social outcomes. And again, the messages are more clear in this space. So what the literature shows is that the initial placement, the initial stream placement, is often related to socioeconomic background. Now, there's nothing in psychology or in what we know about learning and people to say that people from low socioeconomic backgrounds should somehow automatically fall in a low streamed class. So there's an inequity that goes on here straight away, just based on socioeconomic status. Of course, this then also gets played out through race and class, and we tend to see more of our Māori and Pacifica learners in low streamed classes relative to the Pākehā students. So when you look at all of the different things and how they interplay, streaming has a massive effect on social inequity. So that's something very clear that comes out very clear in the research in this literature review. Now, the final element that I think is quite interesting in our work that we do is to think about the teacher and what effect does the teacher have? Because certainly that's another compounding factor into whether streaming is a positive thing or a negative thing. Because it's so unclear, another factor that affects that is the teacher and how they conceptualize their students, how they conceive of their students, and also the opportunities that they give to their students. So we know that teachers tend to think of high stream classes more positively. They have higher perceptions of the ability of the students, their personality, their behavior, their relationships with the students. While teachers of low ability students or low stream students tend to develop lower expectations. They offer less opportunities for homework. They have a lesser pace for the instruction. The work is less difficult, and also the kind of nature of the work that's set is often more routine and more less open-ended. So really, we're kind of bumping into another element, really, which is the complexity of teaching, and that's to do with teaching quality. We know that people like John Hattie actually signal to us that teaching quality is the factor that has the biggest interplay in student outcomes. So we as teachers have the biggest effect on outcomes for our learners. And that the main thing that we needed to be doing is having high expectations, challenging all of our students regardless of the stream that they're in. So if we look on balance, we hear really mixed messages here, different outcomes for different learners. But since we know that in New Zealand, we are working towards having all of our students being achievers of mathematics and of any curriculum area, and we've got a particular issue with a very long tail for our learners, and we're particularly concerned that our Māori and Pacifica learners are overrepresented in low achievement, and also overrepresented in low stream classes, this is really a part of that call to action that we've really got to address and think about. Why are we continuing to stream our classes, especially for our Māori and Pacifica learners? So really, this is about culturally responsive practice, something that we're all being asked to really, interrogate our own thinking and work in our classrooms. And I just want to return back to our learners and the messages that they give us about the effect of being in the low stream class. And I think in this case, the CAB classes, we saw it in your Jamboards just before, the cabbage class. I think that's what it's referring to there. So our young people are telling us they know that they're being put into the cabbage class, and that can have an ongoing effect to their well-being, but also socially for our country, for the opportunities that we have going forward. So I think even if the other things are unclear for me, if the social impact is so negative, then I want to break down these walls really and kind of address the streaming in our classes. It's not good enough for us to continue to do this, knowing that we're having such an impact on our Māori and Pacifica learners. So that kind of takes me to the next sort of part of this presentation, really, because I want to go to that next step. Well, what do we do about it? How can we do something more effective, especially if I have a mixed attainment class? How will I make acceleration happen? And in the work that I've been doing with Heather and other people at Cognition through programs with students, I've been bumping into this word acceleration. Coming from a secondary background, I've got a different definition of what acceleration is. So I want to explore these two words, these two ways of looking at acceleration. So I hope you'll continue with me on that journey. So two ways of looking at acceleration, thinking about our high attainment students and thinking about our lower attainment students. So let's start with the blue slides first, where I'm going to think about our high attainment students. So in a secondary context, when I talk about acceleration, it's often to do with taking my top students and running them through the curriculum quicker. So I have year 10 students who work at year 12, for example, and maybe when they're in year 13, they might start doing some university papers ahead of time. So I thought, let's dig into the research around this kind of acceleration. And I've highlighted there that I needed to put a proper reference in that. So I need to do that. I've got the reference on one of my other slides. So when we think about dealing with top students, there's three different ways that you can think about how, the kinds of programs that you could organise for our top or gifted students. Essentially, there are two toolboxes. There could be the enrichment toolbox, where you take your students out from their normal classes and give them some really fun and amazing activities, and it's kind of separate from the regular curriculum, but it helps to keep them engaged and moving along through stuff. Or there's this idea of acceleration, where you move faster through the curriculums, maybe skipping over some years and compressing the time that it's all being taught in. When we understand the assumptions of that, then we're really thinking of education as a race to the end of the curriculum. Is that really what education is all about? And if we think about this model of acceleration, we're really magnifying the gaps that arrived right from the very, very beginning. So the gaps that were there for our kindergarten students will continue to grow wider and wider. And we notice that it's predominantly white and upper middle class students who end up getting further ahead quicker. If we think about developing talent, how do we really develop talent? The research kind of indicates three ways. We could teach to the top, we could do amazing projects, non-routine problem solving, and we can partner with other specialists. So we can look at that cross-curricular space. essentially we look for what makes our students unique, and then we work to that potential. So we're growing that catalyst, or finding catalysts to grow that talent. I want you to hold on to that thought, because I'm going to come back to it a bit later on. In other words, if you teach your students as if they're gifted, they're going to perform to those expectations. So now let's go back to the kind of two ways of thinking of acceleration, and let's have a look at the green slides, thinking about our lower attainment students. Let's define acceleration in a different way. So here I'm leaning on the work that we do in the programs for students work. So all ALIM and MST, you hear the talking about them before. What's been an absolute revolution for me in doing this work with our primary colleagues is hearing about this word acceleration in a very different way. Acceleration is that described as students progressing noticeably faster, progressing faster than expected, or perhaps faster than their previous learning. So it's the idea of moving students quickly from the below expected level to hopefully to expected level more quickly, that concept of acceleration. I quite often will use a physics definition of acceleration to help understand it. A change of velocity. So sometimes I'm speeding up, sometimes I'm slowing down, and sometimes I'm changing direction. So when we're using accelerative practices in our classroom, we sometimes might actually move through material quicker, other times slowing it down, but carefully thinking about those deliberate actions of acceleration. If you're interested in this concept, totally recommend these two books. In fact, the first chapter of Learning in the Fast Lane pretty much says it all. The key idea here is about defining acceleration as different, quite different from remediation. So rather than just kind of repeating stuff from lower levels and doing it at a pace, you know, kind of thinking, oh, I'm doing the right thing because I'm meeting my student where they are, and then I'm just going to recover things over and over. Rather, I'm going to aim high, aim for the level they need to be working at, representative of their age, and building a carefully well-constructed scaffold to support them to engage with that material. It's about having amazing, fun, enriching activities that are highly engaging and pulling those students back as capable learners in our classroom. It's quite a subtle difference, in fact, because quite often I can hear myself turning back to that remediation idea, and I need to reread the reading to kind of get that subtle difference. If you've not read this book before, I totally recommend reading at least chapter 1 to get that idea of that subtle difference between acceleration and remediation. So again, suddenly we have this high expectations stuff come straight back out. It's about igniting curiosity, engagement, having clear goals, providing students with the opportunity to learn. Remember that tree, you know, and the seesaw, having students at the top part of the seesaw so they've got the opportunity to learn. Teaching to the expected level, yes, providing scaffold and practicing essential skills, and that beautiful, warm, supportive classroom. Whoops, I'm clicking on the wrong slideshow. Here we go. So for any class, we need to choose activities and problems that make students think, that are engaging and mathematically rich. And here's this thing again. If you teach students as if they're gifted, guess what? They perform according to those expectations. So I hope you see I've taken the word acceleration, two different definitions, two bodies of research that unpack the word acceleration. But essentially, they both come back to the same thing. They both come back to this idea of engaging and mathematically rich classrooms, teachers with high expectations, and relationships which are central to the learning environment. So two different groups of students, perhaps we could perceive them as being different. Imagine if we've got them all in the same class, we essentially need to be doing the same things with them. Amazing, rich, good relationships and high expectations. That's the key for both ends of the spectrum for our students. So not that straightforward to pull off though, you're right? Because how do you actually, even if you were convinced by the literature or convinced by hearing our learners once they become adults reflecting on what it was like to be in that low level class, the cabbage class as it's often referred to, how do we actually go on a journey to break down this streaming? Any change in classrooms and schools, especially something which has been so embedded in our system, how do we go on the journey towards change? I'm going to offer a couple of ideas because I think it's really important. We don't just kind of just land somewhere and say it shall be so. And I want to lean on the work of Viviane Robinson. I've done a little bit of work with Viviane Robinson early in my teaching career when I was doing my master's degree. And she's a formidable person to work with because she really wants to challenge your perceptions and your beliefs. And her models of thinking about how to bring about change in schools is all around this. First of all, she challenges the words change and innovation. She says, we don't want change just for the sake of change, and we certainly don't want innovation just because it sounds like it's the shiny next thing that we need to do. We need to actually be convinced that whatever it is that we're doing is actually an improvement. We need to leave our school, our team, our network, our system in a better state than it was before. So anything that we do in a school needs to be based on research, which tells us it's actually going to create an improvement in student outcomes. So here's some of her work about how you might engage in this process. We need to allow robust debate. We need to be really clear about what is it that we think that needs to be improved, and how sure are we that the solution that we've come across is actually going to address the causes that we've identified. In other words, we need to really understand what our theory of action is. If we dig a little bit deeper into this idea of theory of action, it's all about really challenging ourselves and our colleagues to understand what our beliefs and values are that underpin the work we do and why we do it the way that we do it. So if these are my beliefs and values, then these could be the consequences. This is why I designed my classroom, my department, my school the way that I have. So if we're going to undertake a process of improvement, we need to think about how we take teachers with us. If you can see this flow chart in this diagram, we start with a leader's change agenda. And we might go through a process where we just persuade everyone that this is going to be the right way. I'm going to completely disregard the teacher's own theory of action. We're going to not bother to claim any agreement on either of our theories of action. And I'm just going to launch into it and make it happen in my school or department. Now, this will lead to a teacher either complying or resisting. Or maybe the teacher will adapt to the teacher's new theory of action. So often I see teachers in staff rooms nodding nicely and politely, maybe sometimes not so politely, and then when they return to their classroom, they close the door and continue doing whatever it is they were doing before. If we really wanted to create a change in what we're doing, or rather an improvement in what we're doing, Viviane Robinson's proposing that we take an engaging approach. So we start with our change agenda. We have a process where we engage with each other's beliefs around that, our own beliefs of why we think this is a positive change. Reading the research is part of doing that, right? Coming to this workshop might be part of doing that as well. Exploring that with the teachers and the faculty. So having those theories of action put up for discussion to see if we can move on it, to see if we agree or disagree, whether we can find more information, more input to hopefully agree on some sort of theory that we can work towards to implement a change, where the decision is a joint decision to change, so that we're taking people with us. So there's a process around this where we might actually, after this process, decide that whatever the leader's change agenda is might mean that we're not going to make the change. That might happen as well. If you're interested in reading some more about this, there are a number of really amazing webinars online where Viviane talks about this. And it's interesting because although Viviane works across the whole curriculum, both primary, secondary, and in tertiary sectors, her examples are quite often from working with mathematics teachers, particularly secondary mathematics teachers. We must be a difficult group or a challenging group to kind of shift or move. Or maybe we still haven't kind of done enough discussion in this phase here. We're still working through these discussion points. So the key thing really is this idea of teachers' beliefs. What do teachers believe? Because that has such an impact on how we organise our classroom environment, our departments, and therefore our schools. So in my research about how do you change teachers' beliefs, I've come across some lovely research from Donahue and Katz, where there are 4 different ways of affecting teacher beliefs and maybe moving them from one thing to another. This is where PLD comes in, because if you've got a partner in your journey of change or improvement, then we're going to be able to work through these things together to think about how we could provide opportunities and experiences for all our leaders and teachers in our schools to address and think about what our beliefs are and how we might shift those beliefs if necessary. So obviously that's a little plug, right? A little plug for the PLD work that I know that Heather and I and others in the room also do in our work. As a final little thought before we finish up today, I'd like to play this little video, the 3-carriage train, which I find really useful and is one that I play for myself regularly to remind myself of how our work isn't an easy piece of work. It's always challenging. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let it play. And Heather, do you mind to give me a thumbs up if the sound is working to make sure that it is okay? That'd be cool. Here we go.
So if your job is to come up with innovative ways to use technology in the classroom, then the hardest part is not coming up with the ideas, but spreading them. And that can seem overwhelming. But if you can, picture a 3-carriage train. And on the first carriage, you have the teachers that are very quick to adopt new innovation. In the middle carriage are the teachers who are not yet ready to be innovative. They may need incentives, they may not feel skilled enough, or they may need more time.
Oh, that was me, sorry.
Whatever the reason, they're sitting on the fence. In the last carriage are the people who don't want to know. They don't want to hear it, and they won't be convinced no matter what you say. So the question is, where to best invest your energy? If you try the last carriage, you'll find that you're wasting a lot of your energy and wasting a lot of your time. It's nothing personal. You represent the change that scares them. You represent a real threat. You're not that threat, but you represent the threat. You often leave from that carriage feeling very drained. You can influence them, just not directly, and I'll show you how in a bit. It's too easy to spend too much of your time in the front carriage, because that's where the fun is. They're the ones thinking and behaving like you. They're being innovative, they're engaging students, they're taking risks, and they're not afraid to fail. They already believe what you believe, so don't spend too much time there. Dip in every now and then, especially because they can re-energize you. But your energy is best spent in the middle carriage. They can swing either way. They need convincing, but the best part is that they're open to it. Have an action plan and share your vision here. Give them what they need, be it skills or incentives or resources. And if you plan it well, and you truly believe in your vision, then people from the middle carriage will start moving to the first carriage. The first few are the most courageous, because they'll stand out from the crowd. What you've done here is acquire your first followers, and initial followers are incidental leaders. Ask them to publicly present what they've done, because the transforming power comes from making these new leaders public. And people in the back carriage will notice this movement you've started in the middle carriage. Remember, they were never interested in hearing you sing your message, and they're still not. You're not singing solo anymore, you've started a choir. And it's not about you anymore, it's about the movement you've started. Very soon after that happens, jumping into the first carriage is no longer new or novel or even risky. It simply becomes normal.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I do. I'll put the link into the slideshow after this, because I think it's such a useful way of thinking about supporting change, even if it's not technology that you're doing, but change in mathematics teaching and learning. So to conclude our session, I just want to encourage you to think about how we might be able to help. The PLD hours that the ministry have available for schools to apply for are focused around 3 main priority areas: cultural capability, local curriculum design, and assessment for learning. And I'm sure you can see from this work that actually all 3 of those areas are appropriate to apply for. There's a closing date next week on Friday, and another one in term 4 on the 4th of November. Get in touch with Heather or I, we can help you. We can brainstorm some ideas of how we might go about a PLD journey to support you in this kind of work. We can help you complete the application, and we can help you develop a delivery plan. Basically, we work in a bespoke kind of way. We don't have a one-way fits for everyone. We like to work with you and think about what's going to work for you and your school. So that brings us to the end of the presentation, and we've still got a couple of minutes left. So I'm just wondering if we want to open it to the floor and just see if there's any questions or queries before we finish with a karakia. Please don't be shy. Is that an appropriate amount of wait time, do you think? All right, well, I'll share the screen again, and perhaps you'd like to join us in saying the closing karakia for today. So, kua mutu a mātou mahi, mo tēnei wā, ma ki te mai mātou katoa, a mātou hou o mātou whānau, a eko ki ahurangi. Our work has finished for the moment. Bless us all, our colleagues, our family. My apologies, I can't see the little last bit at the bottom. Our families, peace to the universe. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you so much for participating today.
Kia ora, Julia. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.